Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Dreaming Isle. I'm here to guide you into a calm and magical place tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps bring more dreamers to our little corner of the stars. And if you'd like, share in the comments, what's the world outside your window like right now? Now, find your cozy spot. Let go of the day, and let the story begin. I have always been a seeker of truths better left buried. My father called it scholarly hunger. My mentors called it a curse. But the day I left the university with nothing but a satchel of books and my ink-stained hands, I knew I'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Now I walk a road churned to black mud by too many boots. The borderlands are dying, fields left fallow, villages abandoned to rot. At dusk the wind carries a scent like burned parchment. Ashvale, they call it. They say nothing grows there but regret. I've come to find the library of hollow words, said to lie buried beneath Ashvale's ruin. An archive of knowledge so foul the ancients sealed it in catacombs and carved wards in the bones of those who built it. Yet my dreams draw me on. Each night I see shelves lined with books bound in human skin, whispering secrets in languages I almost understand. I wake shaking but hungry for more. Tonight I camp beneath a twisted oak, my fire a tiny defiance against the dark. The pages of my journal flutter in the wind. I write by flickering light, though my fingers are numb. Ashvale is close. The sky burns red even in darkness. Birds flee at dawn, leaving silence behind. The old stories say the library knows you as you approach, that it opens only for those who cannot turn away. I listen to the wind. I hear nothing human in its voice. Still, I will not turn back, for I am not afraid of knowing, only of forgetting, and that is why I will find the door. Dawn breaks blood red over Ashvale. The wind hisses through blackened wheat like 1,000 dry tongues. I shoulder my satchel and walk, boots sinking into charred earth. The road ends in a collapsed arch of scorched stone. Runes crawl across its face, black on black, slick as oil. I run a hand over them. The symbols shift under my touch, rearranging themselves into words I almost recognize. Welcome. My throat closes. The stories say the library was sealed after it whispered too many truths, that its doors burned from within, leaving this ruined gate behind as a warning. But the runes glow faintly now, as if tasting me. Welcome. I feel the weight of every book I've stolen from monasteries, every spell I've translated in the dark, every secret I craved when I should have fled. I step through. The air is colder. The wind falls silent. My breath smokes in the stillness. Beyond the arch, the land is dead. Trees stand stripped and skeletal, their branches clawing at a sky the color of bruises. Crows perch in silence, eyes watching but unblinking. I walk carefully. The ground is cracked, black veins spreading in all directions. I see the remains of wards carved into the soil, broken by time or intent. My satchel shifts, the stolen grimoires within restless. I clutch it tighter. A shape waits ahead. Stone steps lead down into darkness, carved above them in a language older than kings. Knowledge is the wound that never heals. I laugh, hoarse and frightened. Then I descend. The stairs spiral down into cold so deep it burns. My lantern guttered in the wind above, but burns steady here, its glow casting long shadows that twist like ink in water. The walls are carved with words and languages I have studied all my life but never fully mastered. My fingers itch to copy them, but when I try to read, the letters shift, sliding away from meaning. I force myself to look forward. The stairs end in a hall lined with statues. They stand in pairs, each one carved from cracked basalt. I see kings and queens, priests, soldiers, scholars. All have their mouths sewn shut with wire. My heart pounds. Between them lie offerings, bones, scraps of vellum covered in blood, rusted blades, teeth, an oath hall, a place to bargain. My breath fogs. Words crawl at the edge of hearing. Speak. I swallow. I seek knowledge. Silence. then a hiss like knives scraping bone. Price. My mouth is dry. I reach into my satchel, fingers closing on my journal. Pages filled with my own words, my observations, my fears. I rip a page out. My own confession. My own sin. I lay it on the altar. The sewn mouth split with what sounds. Wire snags and breaks. Blood drips from cracked stone lips. Welcome. The door at the end of the hall groans open. My legs shake. But I step through. Because this is what I wanted. Isn't it? The door leads into a chamber so vast the lantern barely lights a fraction of it. Shelves stretch into darkness, sagging under the weight of books bound in skin and stitched with black thread. A shape waits by the nearest shelf. Cloaked, hooded, silent. I approach, swallowing my terror. Are you the archivist? It lifts its head. No face. Only shifting words. Ink on parchment, sliding across where flesh should be. I am. Its voice is the rustle of old pages. I grip my satchel tighter. I want knowledge. The archivist doesn't move. All knowledge has cost. I nod, voice shaking. I know. It gestures. A book slides from the shelf and lands at my feet with a wet slap. The cover is pale and freckled. Human skin. This is your question. I force myself to pick it up. My fingers sink into damp leather. The words on its cover rearrange. What price is too high? My heart hammers. I open it. Pages fill with images of me, stealing books, betraying teachers, leaving friends behind. The cost of every truth I claimed. I close it, shaking. Will you pay it? I can't speak. I nod. The archivist leans close. Ink drips from its hood, sizzling on the floor. Then you may read. Shelves groan as books shift, opening to me. I step forward, eyes wide. Because I can't turn back. Not now. I sit cross-legged on the cold floor, the books piled around me like bones. My lantern flickers. Each page I open crawls with words that dig into my mind like claws. I can't stop. I see the truth of kingdoms built on sacrifice, of churches that bled saints dry for blessings, of scholars like me who traded lives for knowledge and called it learning. My eyes blur. I wipe them with trembling fingers, smearing ink across my face. The archivist watches. Silent. Patient. Cost. My voice is a ragged whisper. What do you want from me? It reaches into its robe and draws out a quill carved from bone. The nib is blackened. Your words. I shake. What words? Your truth. My heart feels like glass. I take the quill. Ink crawls up my arm, biting like cold fire. I open my journal to a blank page. My fingers tremble as I write. I have stolen. I have lied. I have sacrificed others for knowledge. I will sacrifice myself. Ink spills thick and black, sinking into the page like blood into soil. The archivist leans close. Accepted. Shelves groan. Books flutter open, pages turning by themselves. Knowledge pours into me. Images. Symbols. Secrets. I scream as my mind burns. The archivist does not move. It only waits. Because this is the pact. And I agreed. When I woke, my face was pressed to a cold stone floor slick with spilled ink. My fingers were cramped around the bone quill, stained black to the wrist. I sat up slowly. My head felt cracked. Every thought was a knife scraping bone. The archivist stood motionless. Shelves stretched away, their books whispering softly. I wiped ink from my mouth. My journal lay open beside me, pages filled with words I didn't remember writing. Symbols twisted and writhed on them, shimmering in the lantern's failing light. You have taken. Its voice scraped across my bones. I forced my mouth to work. I paid. The archivist inclined its head. The words on its hood slithered and formed new shapes. You carry them now. I lifted the journal. The words pulsed like a living thing. My own writing turned to confessions I had not made. Sins I didn't know I had committed. My breath shook. What is this? Truth. I closed the book carefully. My hands trembled. The archivist stepped aside. A path opened between shelves, lined with lanterns that guttered, but did not die. Go. I swallowed. My throat burned. Is it over? Never. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I rose. I tucked the journal into my satchel. The quill I kept in my hand, its nib black and wet. I walked past the archivist. It did not follow, but its whisper curled in my ear as I left. Tell them. I shivered, because I knew I would, and I feared the day I would want to. The lanterns guttered as I walked. The corridor felt too narrow, walls pressing in with rows of shelves leaning over me. Every book was open. Every page was a mouth whispering. My own words drifted back at me. I am a thief. I am a coward. I want to know everything. I clutched the satchel tighter. My feet scuffed the stone, stirring ancient dust that smelled of blood and old vellum. Ahead, the passage widened into a vast hall lined with statues of scholars. Each held a book. Each had their eyes gouged out. Their mouths were open in silent laughter. I stepped carefully between them. My heart hammered. Voices built in the silence. Not from the statues. Not from the books. From the walls. Why did you come? I swallowed. To know. To confess. I stopped. The words buzzed in my skull. I already have. Lies. My knees shook. I opened the journal. The ink writhed. New lines crawled across the page. I want power. I slammed it shut. The statues' mouths split wider. Cracks spread across their faces. Say it. My voice was hoarse. I want power. The hall fell silent. Then the laughter began. Dry, rasping, echoing off the high vault. I covered my ears but could not block it, because it was my own laughter, and I kept walking. At the end of the hall the laughter faded, leaving only my breath. My throat burned raw from screaming at silence. I stood before a gate of black iron. Runes crawled across its bars like worms. They glowed with faint, sickly light. I set down the satchel carefully. My hands shook. The journal pulsed as if alive. I touched the gate. Cold surged through me. The runes flared, searing words into my thoughts. Admit it. My jaw clenched. Admit. I closed my eyes. My voice was thin, a child's whimper. I want to know everything, even if it ruins me. The runes flickered. Even if it ruins them? My mouth went dry. I forced the words out. Yes. The gate groaned. Metal bent and screamed. The door opened slowly, darkness spilling like ink. I picked up the journal. It was warm now like flesh. The bone quill trembled in my grasp. I stepped through. Inside, the air was choked with dust and the sweet, rotten smell of old parchment. Shelves towered in the dark, endless and uneven. Whispers rose in greeting. Welcome. My heart thundered, because I realized too late. There was no leaving, only going deeper. The shelves twisted overhead, so tall I couldn't see their tops. Books bound in skin, scrolls written in blood, tablets of cracked bone etched with screaming faces. I walked slowly, the lantern's light swallowed by shadows. The whispers grew louder. I felt watched. Ahead, a shape waited behind a desk carved of black with slick with blood. A man, or what once was. His face was split by an impossible grin stretching ear to ear. Teeth like broken quills. Eyes black as ink, swirling with words. Welcome, scholar. His voice was silk dragged over glass. I swallowed hard. Who are you? The librarian. He gestured around him with bony fingers. This is your inheritance. My breath fogged. I don't want this. He chuckled. The sound made my skin crawl. But you asked. You paid. You wrote your truth. He lifted a ledger, its cover stitched from lips. It parted wetly as he opened it. My name was there, scrawled in my own handwriting. You are ours. I felt my knees weaken. I can leave. He closed the ledger. The mouths on the cover screamed. Of course. He leaned forward, grin widening. But you will take us with you. My satchel squirmed. The journal within pulsed like a beating heart. The librarian's laughter filled the hall, and I realized I would carry them forever. He gestured behind him. A door appeared, carved of pale wood and covered in countless runes. They glowed softly, beckoning. You may go. My voice trembled. What's the cost? He smiled wider. Flesh split, black ink dripping from the cracks. You will speak us. My hand shook as I touched the journal in my satchel. It twitched under my fingers. The bone quill pulsed with my heartbeat. Speak you. Tell them. His voice was thunder and whisper at once. Tell them what you saw, what you know, what you are. The runes on the door burned brighter. I felt the whispers in my mind seething, coiling. If you do not speak, we will. My mouth went dry. I looked back at the endless shelves, at the librarian who watched without blinking. I'll tell them, I said hoarsely. Good. The door swung open with a creak that sounded like laughter. Cold wind rushed through, carrying the scent of dead leaves and freedom. My heart pounded. I stepped through. Behind me the door slammed shut. The laughter faded, but the words remained. Whispering, begging, screaming. I walked into gray dawn, clutching the journal. Because this was my burden now. To carry them, to speak them, so that they would never be forgotten. I emerged into dawn that felt gray and lifeless. The wind cut like blades. My breath smoked in the cold. Behind me, the door had vanished, leaving nothing but frost-hardened soil. I stood alone, but I wasn't empty. The journal felt like a living thing in my satchel. It pulsed against my hip with every heartbeat. The bone quill dug into my belt, cold as ice even through fabric. The whispers in my skull were softer here, but no less insistent. Speak us. I adjusted the satchel and forced my legs forward. The path was little more than ruts winding through dead grass. Fog clung low, turning the world into shifting gray. I saw shapes in the mist, hunched, watching, but when I blinked, they were gone. Tell them. My voice cracked. There's no one here. Silence answered. I walked until the road split. One path led down to a dry riverbed, cracked and broken. The other climbed into tangled woods where no birds sang. I chose the woods. Roots caught my boots. Branches snagged my cloak. The wind died here. All sound was swallowed, except the whispers. You promised. I sank to my knees on rotting leaves. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. Ink slithered across its pages, forming words I didn't remember writing. Confessions. Secrets. I read them aloud, voice ragged. I see you. I choked. I remember. The forest held its breath. The wind returned, softer now. I closed the book. I stood, and I kept walking, because the only way out was through. The path narrowed until it vanished into brambles. I cut my way through with a dull knife, branches bleeding black sap that smelled of old blood. I stumbled into a clearing ringed by standing stones. Each was carved with tongues, dozens, hundreds, nailed to the rock with rusted iron. They twitched in the wind. I gagged. The journal at my side pulsed, eager. Speak. The tongues writhed in unison. Speak us. I swallowed bile. My fingers went numb as I opened the journal. The ink on the page shifted, forming names. Faces I'd seen in the library. The archivist. The librarian with his ink-black smile. My own reflection screaming. My voice trembled. I remember you. The tongues quivered. Say it. I read the words. My throat burned as I spoke of bargains paid in blood and truth. Of knowledge that devoured. The wind picked up, rattling the nailed tongues. They screeched in chorus, then fell silent. Remember. I sank to my knees, breath ragged. I do, I whispered. The tongues stilled. The wind died. I closed the journal with shaking hands. The path forward cleared. Brambles parted. I forced myself to stand, because forgetting was the real curse, and I had chosen to remember. I walked for hours through twisted woods where no birds sang. The silence felt heavy, like a closed tomb. My boots sank into wet earth that smelled of rot. Eventually the trees fell away, revealing a wide hollow filled with fog that clung low like smoke. I hesitated. The whispers in my head sharpened. Cross. I tightened my grip on the journal. The fog moved like something alive, curling around my ankles as I stepped forward. Shapes appeared and vanished, faces screaming silently. arms outstretched. My heart hammered. Speak us. My voice cracked. I don't want to. Speak. My knees buckled. I opened the journal. Ink slithered over the pages, forming confessions I didn't want to see. I killed with knowledge. I betrayed for secrets. I wanted power. Tears burned hot in the cold fog. I forced the words out. I did these things. I chose them. The fog writhed. The faces froze, watching. Remember, my voice was raw. I do. The fog fell silent. It cleared slowly, revealing the far side of the hollow. I stood on shaking legs, closing the journal. I crossed. Because I had to. Because I promised. Beyond the hollow the land climbed sharply, rocks jutting like broken teeth. I scrambled up, hands scraped and bloody. At the summit I found a ruin. Crumbled walls of black stone. An archway standing alone, carved with spirals and symbols that crawled when I looked too long. The scriptorium. I'd read of it in forbidden texts. A place where scribes wrote bargains in blood so the library would hear. My heart sank. Right. The whisper was hungry. I set the journal on a broken plinth. The wind cut at me, freezing tears to my face. I opened it to a blank page. The bone quill trembled in my hand. Ink oozed from its nib without end. I wrote. I wanted to know everything. I ruined lives to learn. I will carry what no one wants to remember. The symbols on the walls flared red. The wind roared. More. My tears blurred the page. I will speak it. I will never turn away. I will remember. The wind fell silent. The symbols cooled. I closed the journal, breath ragged. The path beyond the ruin opened, grass pressed flat as if waiting for me. I picked up the book and walked, because the work wasn't finished. Not yet. The path wound down from the ruins into gentler hills. Grass shivered under frost, catching dawn light in tiny stars. The wind was softer here, sighing instead of screaming. But I heard them in it. Speak. My boots scuffed old ruts worn by centuries of feet. I passed mile markers cracked and half buried. Each one bore faint runes that pulsed as I neared. Remember, I touched them. Heat flooded my fingers despite the cold. Images rushed in, faces I'd seen in the library. Pages scrawled in blood. The librarian's grin splitting impossibly wide. I stumbled, gasping. I will, I whispered. I pressed on. Ahead, I saw smoke rising from chimneys. A village. People. Ears to hear. My heart pounded. Tell them. My fingers closed on the journal. It twitched, eager. I felt sick. Exhausted. But I kept walking. Because I had chosen this road. The one that never ended. The one that meant no one would forget. Because forgetting was the worst sin. And I was done sinning. So I walked, ready to speak. I reached the village at dusk, frost crunching under my boots, breath steaming in ragged clouds. The cottages were squat and leaning, their roofs sagging under the weight of old snow. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, pale and thin. As I entered the central clearing, doors slammed. Shutters clapped closed. Silence swallowed everything. But one old man sat by a sunken fire pit, stirring embers with a split branch. He did not look up as I approached. The journal pulsed at my side, warm as blood. The whispers pressed. Speak. My voice cracked. I need shelter. He didn't turn. All travelers pay. My fingers trembled as I undid the satchel's buckle. The journal fell into my hands, heavy, alive. Ink writhed across its cover like worms in wet soil. I sank to my knees in frozen grass. I opened the book. Faces swam in black script. Mouths gaped, screaming silently. The wind died. The fire hissed. I read. My voice shook as I told of the fog-choked hollow, of nailed tongues that demanded confession, of the archivist hood that dripped living ink, of bargains struck in blood. When I finished, my throat burned raw. The whispers fell quiet. The old man spit into the fire. You're cursed. Tears stung my eyes. So are you. He snorted. True enough. He shuffled on the log, patted the dirt beside him. Fire's warm. Sit if you want. I sat. The journal rested heavy in my lap, but the whispers were silent. For tonight, at least, I was heard. Dawn came gray and silent. Frost glittered on rooftops like a mocking crown. My cloak was stiff with ice. I forced myself upright, bones aching from cold. The old man snored softly, hat tipped over his eyes. The journal pulsed in my lap. It was warm, alive, waiting. I opened it. Blank pages stared back at me. Right. My fingers cramped around the bone quill. Ink welled black and thick, oozing without end. I dipped and scrawled, my hand shaking. I am a thief of secrets. A coward who runs. A scholar who pays with blood not his own. The words sank deep, hissing. The old man stirred. His eyes met mine, roomy but sharp. More confessions? He croaked. I nodded. They don't stop. He watched me a long moment. Good. Means you're trying. My throat closed. I wiped tears from my cheek, leaving black smears. He pushed himself up, joints cracking. Sun's coming. Best you be going. I shut the journal. Ink bled from its seams. The whispers softened. I stood slowly. My breath smoked. Thank you, I rasped. He spat into the ashes. Don't thank me. Just keep telling it. I nodded, and I walked away, the journal heavy but quiet at my side. The path bent through fields rimed with frost. Grass crunched beneath my boots like old bones. Breath fogged the cold air. The wind hissed through dead hedgerows. The journal pulsed at my hip, hot against my side. Speak. I tried to ignore it. My fingers clenched the strap until my knuckles ached. Shapes moved in the fog. Figures with hollow eyes, mouths stretched in silent screams. They stood at the road's edge, unmoving, watching. My heart thundered. I stopped. My mouth tasted of fear. I unlatched the satchel. The journal fell into my hand, heavy and eager. It opened on its own, pages slapping wetly. Ink poured, forming words. Names. Faces. Crimes. Speak. I forced my voice to work. I see you, I whispered. The wind fell silent. More. My voice broke. I remember. The words carved themselves deeper into the page. My throat burned. I read them all. Every sin. Every truth I had stolen. The blood I had let spill for knowledge. The shapes in the fog leaned closer. Listening. When I finished, the wind returned, gentler. The road cleared. I closed the journal, hands shaking. And I walked. Because that was the promise. And the punishment. The road turned toward a river choked with ice. Black water gurgled beneath broken sheets, moaning like something alive. A stone bridge arched over it, old and cracked. Moss clung to its flanks, black as rot. Symbols were carved deep into every block, spirals and eyes that watched me. My breath trembled. Speak. I stepped onto the bridge. The wind howled through its arches like a chorus of the damned. The stones felt warm underfoot, alive. Faces bulged in the mortar, mouths open in eternal scream. Speak. I fell to my knees. My palms scraped rough stone. I pulled the journal free. It fell open with a wet sound, pages alive with slithering ink. Confessions. Sins. Betrayals. My own name scrawled over and over in black. My voice cracked. I remember you. The wind died. More. I read every line. Every horror. My own voice hoarse, breaking. The symbols glowed softly, warming beneath my touch. The faces in the stone relaxed. The wind returned, gentle. I pushed myself to shaking feet. The road continued on the far side, bathed in pale dawn light. I closed the journal, and I crossed, because forgetting was death, and I would not die. Beyond the bridge the land opened wide and flat, fields rimed with frost that cracked beneath every step. A road cut straight through them, lined with ancient mile markers sunk half into frozen mud. Their symbols were worn, almost gone, but they pulsed faintly as I passed. The whispers pressed harder in my skull. Speak. My breath fogged. I clutched the journal tight. There's no one here. Silence. Speak. My heart thudded. I stopped. I opened the journal. Pages rustled with hunger, ink forming words like wounds. Faces appeared, screaming in black lines, my own among them. Speak. My voice shook. I see you. The wind fell away, the world holding its breath. More. Tears burned. I remember. The mile markers flared, light crawling through old runes. More. My voice broke. I read every line, every confession, every sin. The wind howled, then softened. The markers dimmed. The journal quieted. Ahead, the road rose gently towards smoke rising from distant chimneys. A village waited, ears to hear. I closed the journal, fingers trembling. But I walked, because that was the bargain. To speak, to be heard, to never forget. I arrived as the sun bled out behind black trees, the last light a smear of dying fire. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys, gray fingers grasping at dusk. I felt the whispers before I heard them. Speak. My boots scuffed frost-hardened earth. Children ran at the sight of me. Doors slammed. Dogs snarled and fell silent. But one woman stood at the edge of the path, hair bound in a red scarf, arms crossed, eyes cold as the wind. She didn't flinch as I approached. Stranger, she called. What do you want here? My voice was hoarse. Shelter. She snorted. We don't give freely. The journal pulsed at my side, eager. My fingers shook as I unclasped it. The wind fell silent. Speak. I dropped to my knees in the frozen mud. The book fell open. Ink writhed. Faces screamed silently from the page. I forced the words out. Of the archivist whose hood wept words. The shrine of nailed tongues. The bone quill that drank confession. My own hunger that devoured everything it touched. When my voice broke, the wind howled around us, tearing at clothes and hair. The woman didn't move. She watched me until silence fell again. Finally, she jerked her chin. Barn's empty. Fire's warm. If you're willing to share that story with the others. I swallowed. Tears stung in the cold. I will. She nodded. Then follow. The whispers fell quiet, sated. I stood, and I followed. The barn smelled of old hay and smoke. A single hearth burned low at the center, orange light flickering across faces drawn tight with hunger and fear. They watched me enter, eyes following every movement. The woman with the red scarf gestured to the fire. Sit. I obeyed, the journal heavy in my lap. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Ink crawled across the pages like insects in blood. The whispers pressed. Speak. My mouth went dry. I forced breath into my lungs. I've seen the fog devour villages, I began. I've seen chains bite into flesh, bargains written in blood. They listened, unmoving. I told them of the library of hollow words, of shelves that screamed when touched, of the archivist who demanded truth carved from bone, of the librarian with ink-black eyes and a mouth that split too wide. My own cowardice, my greed for knowledge, the price paid in lives I would never know. The children stared, wide-eyed. One man buried his face in his hands. The woman watched me with flinty eyes, but didn't speak. When my voice cracked and fell silent, the wind rattled the walls. She finally nodded. You'll sleep here tonight, and you'll tell it again tomorrow. I closed the journal with shaking fingers, because that was the bargain, and I accepted it. Morning broke gray and thin as old parchment. Frost feathered the barn walls. Breath steamed in clouds. They gathered around the dying fire, eyes dull with sleeplessness. The woman sat opposite me, arms folded. Again, she ordered. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. Pages stuck together with frozen ink, peeling apart with wet sounds. The bone quill rested at my side, blackened and sharp. The words crawled in fresh lines. Speak. I drew a ragged breath. I went where I shouldn't. I told them of the fog that swallowed memory, the chained ones in hollows begging to be remembered, the well that fed on faces, of my own confession carved into the shrine of tongues, the bone quill that bit my hand, of standing before the librarian, bargaining with everything I had. Their faces paled. A child whimpered. I didn't stop, because the whispers wouldn't let me. When I fell silent, voice shredded, The wind outside shrieked through the barn slats. The woman wiped her face. "Eat something," she rasped. "You'll need your strength." I nodded weakly. The journal rested in my lap, warm. The whispers quiet, waiting for the next telling. I sat by the fire that night, eyes red, throat raw. The villagers gathered close. The woman with the red scarf turned to an elder with a face lined like old bark. He watched me in silence. Finally, he spoke. "Why tell us this?" My fingers tightened on the journal. The whispers pressed. "Speak." I swallowed. "Because if no one remembers, it happens again." He spat into the fire. Sparks flew. "We know darkness." I shook my head. "Not like this." I described the archivist's ledger of blood, the shelves groaning with books bound in skin, the gate that demanded truth to open, my own sins laid bare in ink that moved like worms. The elder's mouth twisted. "You want us to carry your guilt?" My voice cracked. "No, I want you to carry memory." Silence fell heavy. Children huddled against parents. Flames hissed as logs split and settled. Finally, the elder nodded once. "Then tell it all." The whispers in my head fell silent. I opened the journal, and I obeyed. Dawn clawed at the sky with red fingers. The wind blew sharp as knives through the village lanes. Smoke from dying fires spiraled away like spirits freed. I stood at the edge of the barn, pack slung over one shoulder. The journal rested heavy inside, pulsing with living warmth. They gathered behind me, faces pinched and pale, eyes red from weeping or lack of sleep. The woman approached. She pressed something into my hand. Hard, cold, a carved token, a single spiral, old runes worn but legible. "Take it," she said. I swallowed. "Why?" Her gaze didn't soften. "So you don't forget we listened." My chest hurt. I nodded. She stepped back. I turned away, feet crunching frost, the road ahead vanishing into gray dawn. The whispers pressed gently now. "Speak." I exhaled, breath white in the cold. "I will," I promised. I walked, because that was the price. To carry them, to speak them, to never let them be lost. And I accepted it. Dawn bled slowly over a gray sky, pale and cold as old bone. The wind bit through my cloak, cutting to the marrow. Frost cracked under my boots as I trudged along the narrow, rutted path, the journal thumping against my side like a second heartbeat. Smoke still rose behind me from the village I'd left, a thin smear of memory in the frozen air. My fingers felt numb as I clutched the strap. Each step was a confession forced from unwilling legs. The land was dead. Charred husks of trees lined the road, their branches like clawed hands reaching for something long gone. Blackened soil crumbled beneath frost, refusing to give birth to anything but regret. "Speak." The voice was patient, pressing against my mind like a cold knife laid gently at my throat. I stopped. My breath steamed. My hand shook as I drew the journal from the satchel. Ink oozed from its seams, thick and black, like blood that refused to clot. I opened it. Faces blinked up at me from the pages. The archivist's hooded silhouette, the librarian's mouth torn in a grin too wide for any human skull, the old man at the fire, the woman with the red scarf, and my own face, screaming. My voice cracked. "I remember you." The wind fell silent. I remember everything. The ink writhed. Words etched themselves across the page. I killed with knowledge. I fed on secrets. I betrayed for power. My eyes burned. Tears stung, freezing as they fell. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The wind stirred, softer now. "Speak." So I did. I read every line aloud, until my voice was hoarse and shaking. The frost melted in a ring around my feet, the road seeming to exhale. When I finally fell silent, the whispers quieted. But they didn't leave. They never did. I closed the journal with shaking fingers, wiped frozen tears from my cheeks, and took another step, because that was all I could do. By midday, I reached an ancient line of standing stones, leaning drunkenly in the frozen earth. Each was carved with spirals and runes so old the language hurt to see. Frost clung in the crevices, highlighting symbols like scars. I slowed. My breath puffed in ragged clouds. The journal was a hot weight at my side. The wind died entirely. Speak. My hand trembled as I set the journal on the flat top of one stone. The ink bled over its edges, black veins snaking into ancient grooves. The symbols glowed faintly, awakening to the touch of confession. I opened the pages. They crawled with new words I hadn't written. Liar, thief, betrayer. Faces twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. My heart pounded. I forced breath into my lungs and began to read. Every sin, every bargain, every truth bought with another's blood. The wind roared back suddenly, swirling ash-gray dust from the road, biting my exposed skin. But I didn't stop. My voice cracked and bled. I remember you, I choked. I speak you. I will not forget. The stones vibrated under my hands. The symbols flared with dull red light, then faded as the wind fell away. Silence, but not emptiness. The journal closed on its own. The ink withdrew like a feeding leech, sated for now. I picked it up carefully. My fingers were numb. I pressed it to my chest, heart hammering. And I stepped past the boundary, because there was no turning back. The path twisted down into a hollow choked with cold mist. My boots slipped on slick mud, and thorny brambles clawed at my cloak. The air smelled of wet earth and something older, sour and coppery, like blood left too long in the cold. At the hollow's center stood a circle of flat stones blackened by ancient fires. Symbols etched into them had been defaced, slashed, and burned, but some lines still pulsed faintly with sickly green light. This was a bargaining place, where people had traded truths for silence, where the fog had learned to feed. I swallowed hard. My fingers trembled as I unclasped the satchel. The journal pulsed eagerly, its warmth sickening in the cold. Speak. I fell to my knees on frozen mud. I know what this place is, I whispered. The wind died. The fog thickened. Speak. I opened the journal. Pages fluttered in the windless air. Ink bled across them, black on black, forming names I had stolen from the fog, faces I had seen twisted in agony. I read them, each one. My voice cracked. My breath turned ragged. Tears dripped onto the pages, smearing the words. I remember you. The fog recoiled, hissing like something wounded. The symbols on the stones flared, burned, then went dark. The wind returned, cold but clean. The whispers fell quiet. For a moment, I closed the journal and stood on shaking legs, because memory was the only bargain I had left to make. I climbed out of the hollow with the journal pressed tight to my chest, breath coming in ragged clouds. My knees were caked in frozen mud, hands raw from gripping stone and root. The path ahead narrowed between crumbling walls that might once have marked fields or property lines, now just broken boundaries and frost-choked earth. I walked slowly, the wind sighing through skeletal hedgerows. The journal pulsed, warm and heavy. Speak. My throat hurt. My voice was gone. Speak. I stumbled to a halt. There's no one here, I rasped. Silence. The wind fell away, but the words crawled across the pages. You promised. My fingers trembled. I dropped to my knees, cloak spreading over frost. I remember you, I whispered. Faces blinked up at me from ink-stained pages, the chained ones in their hollow. The archivist's hooded silhouette dripping words like blood. The librarian's splitting grin. My own reflection screaming. I will tell them, I promised. The wind returned, rattling dead branches overhead. Then go. I closed the journal with shaking fingers, white tears that stung in the cold. I stood, and I walked, because that was the work. To carry them, to speak them, to make sure forgetting had no home left in me. The path straightened, cutting across open ground pale with frost. The sky above was the color of old ash, the sun a weak smudge. Ahead, smoke rose from distant chimneys. Another village. Another place with ears. My legs felt leaden. Every step throbbed through joints frozen stiff. The journal bounced against my side, warm with hungry promise. Speak. I clutched it harder. My breath rattled. My heart beat like a drum of warning. As I drew closer, I saw children chasing each other in the frost. Women hanging tattered clothes on lines. Men repairing a collapsed fence. They looked up as I approached, fell silent. Eyes tracked me, narrowed, weary. The whispers in my head pressed harder. Speak. I unshouldered the satchel. The journal fell into my hand, trembling with life. I stopped at the edge of the village. My voice cracked. I have a story, I called. Silence. They waited. I opened the journal. Ink spilled across the pages, forming words that cut like knives. Faces. Names. Screams. My own. I read them. Every sin. Every truth. Every horror I had seen and caused. My voice broke. But I kept going. Because that was the promise. And the price. When I finished, no one spoke. But no one turned away. I closed the journal with numb fingers. The whispers fell silent. And I walked forward. Because remembering was the only mercy I had left to give. The village was small, barely more than a scattering of thatched roofs, smoke rising in wavering columns. I felt every eye on me as I approached. The journal pulsed at my side, hot and insistent. My breath hung in the frozen air, swirling around words I hadn't spoken yet. I stopped in the square, boots cracking on frost. No one spoke at first. The children hid behind legs, peeking with wide eyes. The elders frowned, arms crossed, waiting. I pulled the journal free. Its skin-bound cover writhed under my fingers, ink bleeding along seams like old wounds reopening. My fingers trembled. Speak. My voice cracked in the hush. I have something to tell. A woman with gray-streaked hair stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp as flint. Then speak, stranger, if that's your price. I nodded, throat tight. I opened the journal. The pages crawled with words, black lines forming screaming faces and twisted runes. I read them aloud. Of the fog that devoured memory, the chained ones who begged to be seen, the library of hollow words with its screaming shelves, the archivist who demanded truth carved from bone, my own confessions, my own cowardice, my hunger for forbidden knowledge. The wind fell silent. The crowd listened, unmoving. When my voice faltered, the whispers in my head pressed. More. So I gave them more. I named every sin, every price paid in blood, every truth that scarred my soul. When I finished, the silence was absolute. The woman swallowed hard, eyes glinting wet. She nodded once. You'll eat with us tonight. The whispers fell quiet, and I lowered the journal, feeling its heat ease. Because I had spoken, and they had listened. They led me to a long house that stank of smoke and boiled roots. A hearth smoldered at its heart, throwing uncertain light on huddled forms. Children peered from under blankets. Men and women sat in tense silence, their eyes never leaving me. The journal weighed heavy in my lap, its cover pulsing like a heart that wouldn't stop bleeding. They offered food, stew thin as water, bread hard as stone. I chewed without tasting. The woman with gray-streaked hair sat across from me. Her eyes were deep hollows of exhaustion. Tell us more. I swallowed, voice raw. Speak. The journal trembled. I opened it. Ink slithered over pages, forming words that stank of rot. Faces emerged, mouths frozen in eternal scream. I forced the words out. Of the shrine of tongues nailed to black stone. The bone quill that carved my truth in blood. The librarian's grin that split his face too wide. My own bargains. The lives traded for knowledge. They listened in horror, but no one turned away. Children clutched mothers' skirts. Men gripped crude knives as if to fight the words themselves. When I paused, the whispers rose, pressing against my skull. More. I kept speaking, until my voice broke, until the flames guttered and shadows fell thick. The woman finally held up a hand. Enough for tonight, she whispered. The journal fell silent, but it throbbed, hungry, waiting for tomorrow. I didn't sleep. The wind howled outside the longhouse, rattling loose shutters. Embers cast twisted shadows on dirt floors. The journal lay beside me, quiet but warm, as if listening for my breath. When dawn came thin and gray, the villagers gathered again. No one spoke of the cold or the hunger. They only looked at me. The woman sat opposite. "You have more." My hand shook as I lifted the journal. Ink oozed from its seams, dripping onto my trousers like blood. I opened it. "Speak." I took a deep breath, and I told them of the oath hall where statues wept blood, mouths sewn shut until fed with truth. Of bargains etched in bone, words that couldn't be unsaid. Of the gate that demanded confession to open. Of the knowledge that consumed everything it touched. My own failings. My own greed. Faces paled. A child whimpered, but the mother covered his ears and kept listening. I felt my own tears hot on my face, freezing in the air. When my voice faltered, the whispers pressed. More. I gave them more. Until my throat bled words. Until I was empty. Silence swallowed the room. The woman's voice cracked. "We will remember." I nodded, because that was all I had to give. Memory, and the promise to never let them forget. When they let me leave, dawn was already dying under a slate sky. The woman walked me to the edge of the village, her breath fogging between words. "You think you help us with these stories?" she demanded. My fingers tightened on the journal. "It's all I have. Memory. Truth." Her eyes glittered wet. "Truth doesn't feed children. It doesn't warm the dying." The wind howled, cold as old bones. I swallowed. "It keeps the fog away." Her face twisted. "And brings its scent here instead." We stood in silence. Finally, she pressed something into my hand. A small carved token. The spiral burned into its center, glowed faintly. "For the road," she muttered. "So you remember we listened." My heart clenched. "I'll carry you," I whispered. She stepped back, eyes shining. "Go." I turned from her. The journal pulsed at my side, warm as blood. The wind died to a hush. "Speak." My breath smoked. "I will," I promised. And I walked on, because someone had to. The path twisted away from the village into rolling fields choked with frost. The sky was iron gray, heavy with the promise of snow. My breath fogged before me in ragged clouds. The journal weighed on my hip, warm as a fever. The whispers were quiet but waiting. "Speak." My boots crunched frost-covered grass. Ancient mile markers leaned in the dirt, their symbols eroded but not gone. I stopped at one, pressing a gloved hand to its cracked surface. Ink bled from my palm onto the stone. Faces blinked in the dark lines. Mouths moved without sound. I opened the journal. Pages writhed, forming words that cut deep. "I remember you." I read them. Every sin, every bargain, every truth no one wanted. The wind fell away. Silence pressed close. I felt them around me, shadows in the frost, watching, waiting. When I finished, the mile marker pulsed faintly under my hand. The whispers eased. I closed the journal slowly. My breath shook, but I stepped forward, because the road didn't end, because forgetting was worse than death, because someone had to speak, and I had chosen to be that someone. The road bent through fields gone to ruin. Frostbitten stalks jutted from the earth like ribs of something long dead. Mist hung low, curling around my ankles with greedy fingers. My breath smoked as I forced myself forward. The journal pulsed at my side, hot as fever. The whispers were low but relentless. "Speak." I ignored them at first. The wind cut like blades, carrying with it the smell of old ash. I pulled my cloak tighter, boots sinking in rutted mud. Shapes stood in the fog. At first I thought they were trees, but they had no branches, only outstretched arms frozen and pleading. Faces, eyeless and open-mouthed, seemed carved from the mist itself. I stopped, heart hammering. "Speak." I pulled the journal free. My fingers trembled. The cover writhed under my grip, alive. Pages fluttered in the windless air, ink bleeding in black lines that formed mouths, open and screaming. My voice cracked. "I remember you." The wind fell away. Silence swallowed the fields. I remember the chained ones in their hollow, the nailed tongues on black stone, the well of faces that begged for release. The fog thickened, shapes pressing closer. More. My voice rose, raw. I remember the archivist who drank my truth, the librarian who smiled too wide, my own sins carved into bone, the bargains I made with blood. The mist recoiled as if burned. Faces in the fog screamed soundlessly, then faded. The wind returned, gentler now. I closed the journal with shaking hands, ink smearing my palms. The whispers eased, quiet but not gone, because they were never gone. I wiped tears I hadn't noticed, and I kept walking, because memory was all I had left to give. The day dimmed to twilight, the sky a bruise of purple and sickly yellow. I stumbled into a valley filled with brittle grass that cracked underfoot. The wind carried the scent of distant fires, but no warmth. My breath rasped in my chest. I was so tired. The journal throbbed at my side like an infected wound. Speak. I ignored it, pressing on. The path curved past ancient stones marked with runes eroded by centuries. The symbols pulsed as I passed, glowing faintly with sick light. Speak. My knees buckled. I fell onto the frozen earth. Mud and frost soaked through my trousers. I pulled the journal free. It squirmed in my grip, hot and eager. Speak. My voice shook. I don't want it anymore. Silence fell. Even the wind died. Ink bled across the pages, forming words I hadn't written. Liar. Coward. Thief. Tears burned. My breath hitched. I am those things, I whispered. Faces emerged from the ink, mouths open in silent accusation. Speak. I remember you, I said hoarsely. The wind sighed. I remember every sin, every truth I stole, every life ruined. The symbols on the stones flared, then dimmed. The journal went still. The wind returned, lifting my hair gently. I closed the book carefully and forced myself to my feet, because the road wasn't done with me, and I wasn't done with it. I came upon a lone cottage leaning into the wind, roof sagging under the weight of age and neglect. Smoke drifted from a cracked chimney. The door hung crooked, creaking in the breeze. I knocked. Silence. Then shuffling inside. A man opened it, face pale and lined. I sunk in. He looked at me and said nothing. My voice broke. I need to speak. He didn't answer, but he stepped back. I entered. The room was bare but for a dying hearth, its glow thin as old blood. He sat heavily on a stool, staring into the coals. I unshouldered the satchel, journal squirming in my grip. I sat opposite him. Speak. I opened the book. Ink crawled like worms across the page. Faces twisted in pain, mouths frozen in silent screams. I forced the words out. A fog that devoured memory. Of chained ones who begged to be named. Of the archivist's ink-dripping hood, the librarian's grin that split him in two. Of my own cowardice. My own hunger. My own damnation. The man didn't move. When I fell silent, breath hitching, tears hot on my frozen skin, he finally spoke. Then remember us too. I blinked. He gestured to the empty room. To those you'll leave behind. My chest ached. I will, I whispered. The journal quieted, warm against my palms. And I closed it carefully. I left at dawn, the sky pale and brittle. Frost clung to every blade of grass, every sagging branch. My breath smoked before me in ragged bursts. The man stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching silently. I met his gaze. Thank you, I rasped. He only nodded, as tired, but knowing. I turned away. The journal pulsed at my side, alive. Speak. I gripped it hard. My fingers were black with dried ink that flaked like old scabs. The path ahead twisted through trees stripped of leaves, branches like broken fingers. I stopped at one, pressing my palm to its bark. Ink bled from my skin, soaking into the wood. Faces formed in the grain, mouths open, eyes wide. Speak. I opened the journal. The wind fell silent. I read them. Every name, every sin, every truth carved into me. My voice cracked, shredded raw. I remember you. The faces in the bark relaxed, closing their mouths. The wind sighed, stirring dead leaves. The journal eased in my grip. I closed it slowly. My legs trembled as I stepped away. Because this was the price. To speak. to carry, to never forget, and I had chosen to pay it. The path unrolled before me, gray and cold, vanishing into pale mist. The sky was nothing but an endless smear of silver, light without warmth. My boots crunched frost with every step. The journal rested heavy against my side, silent but alive. Speak. My breath fogged. My heart beat hard and slow, each thought a promise. Ahead, I saw the shape of another village. Smoke curling from chimneys. Figures moving. Faces I didn't know yet, but would. My fingers trembled on the strap of the satchel. Speak. I took a deep breath. I will. I walked. Because memory was all I had left to give. Because forgetting was death. Because the fog still waited for those who didn't remember. Because someone had to carry it. I was that someone. I kept walking. And I spoke. Because that was the promise. And I would not break it.